Are you guys wondering why in the world so many seniors got rejected by so many colleges in 2021? If so, in this video, I'm going to talk about the precipitous decrease in admission rates at elite universities in 2021 and why we saw a whopping 34.4% decrease in admissions at the 10 most competitive colleges in the US and a 30.4% decrease in admission rates at the 30 most competitive colleges in the United States. If you or a senior you know has gotten rejected by a college, take heart, you're in good company. I'm an independent college consultant. My name is Brooke. I've been doing this for over a decade and a half, and we have never seen a season of college admissions this crazy or this precipitously competitive ever. Obviously, COVID-19 is playing a big role in what went down, and we're going to unpack that today. If you're prepping for the SAT or the ACT, we've got a couple of online courses at SupertutorTV.com you can check out. I've also got a couple of books on the ACT math section you can find on Amazon. You can also join our mailing list totally for free if you want to keep in the know of all the awesome college admissions news out there. SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. And you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Cool, announcements over. One quick note. If you really want to dig into this data, we have a whole chart of this fascinating information that we put on our blog at SupertutorTV.com. So be sure to check that out. Okay, cool. So basically this year was crazy at top schools. Harvard, Columbia, Princeton, MIT, and Yale all were sub 5% with their admit rates this year. And the thing is, when you reduce your admit rate by like 1% or 2% and you're already at like 5%, that's a huge percentile decrease in chances, right? We can look at the 2021 admission rates compared to 2020 and 2019, and we see sort of an interesting pattern. From 2019 to 2020, we saw a slight bump in acceptance rates, right? And then from 2020 to 2021, we saw a pretty precipitous decrease. So it's like you can look at Harvard, you've got a 3.4% admit rate in 2021, a 5% admit rate in 2020, and a 4.6% admit rate in 2019. So in any case, let's talk about the why. So the big why is, and the big answer to this is that there's a huge increase in the number of applicants. There's two reasons for the number of applicants increasing. One, I think a lot of you are aware of, which is the test optional and test blind policies that the majority of colleges and universities adopted. The majority of elite colleges and universities this year were test optional, and a few were even test blind. What that means, if they're test optional, if you took the SAT, you want to submit your score, great, awesome, send it. If you didn't take the SAT or the ACT, or if you took it and you want to hide your score, we don't really care. Do what you want. So send your score if you want. Don't send it if you don't want to. And because of that, we saw a 28.6% average increase in applications among top 30 schools of those who've released their data. Then we had a 34.7% increase in applications at the 10 most competitive colleges. Now, I'm taking the 10 most competitive colleges by literally calculating the rate of admission in 2021. So if they were competitive in 2021, that's how they made our list of the 10 most competitive. As you can see, these numbers line up really well with the admit rate changes. So while we had a 30.4% drop in admit rate, we had a 28.6% more application rate. So you can see those numbers are really close together. There's a couple of percentage points difference, and that I think is probably attributed to the fact that there's challenging circumstances with students deferring, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But those numbers are pretty close. And then if we look at the top 10 schools, we have a 34.4% admit rate drop, and we've got a 34.7% increase in applications. So again, we're 0.3% apart there. That's pretty darn close. We did a survey of SupertutorTV students about test optional, and we found that about 32% of the respondents said they took the SAT and submitted it, 15% of respondents said they took the ACT and submitted it, and then 15% took the SAT and didn't submit it, and 5% took the ACT and didn't submit it. We also have a category that's didn't take anything, but if I look at the rest of everything, what we find is that about 20% of the people who took the exam didn't submit it. So if you look at that idea and you think that like, oh, a barrier to applying to a lot of these colleges for many students is the idea that they don't have the test score, well, obviously that comes into play. And without test scores, we're just going to see an increasingly more competitive marketplace in terms of college admissions. Now, there's another explanation as well that I think might be getting into the murk and the mire, and that's the fact that we have more students than ever taking gap years. Not only are a lot of students who were admitted postponing their attendance at schools, and many students sought deferrals of admission, but we also have people who took gap years that didn't get in where they wanted to go. And we saw a real increase in the number of students applying to college a second time clean for freshman admission. Because of those students, you also saw a bigger pool of people applying to college this year. Now, gap years also create a more complicated story, which is why we have really interesting statistical stuff going on a school-by-school basis. So like I said, when you look at the mass percentages, everything kind of lines up. But if you look at it on an individual school basis, there's even more story here that I find pretty fascinating. For example, if we look at the approximate applicant increase and the approximate decrease in admission chances school by school, this becomes a more complex story, right? And the numbers don't line up. For example, at Princeton, there's only a 14.5% increase in the number of applicants, but they've got a 29% decrease in admission chances. Now, the kind of low applicant increase at Princeton, I would guess in part is due to the fact that they didn't have a restrictive early action or early decision plan this year. They forewent that, and no other colleges took that step. And so basically they lost a huge swath of first round kind of applicants that ended up applying early to Stanford or Harvard or wherever if their first choice was Princeton, because there was no way to tell Princeton you're my first choice. So that's probably where some of that came from, but you can see these numbers sometimes go in different directions. But on average, they all even out. And that's kind of an interesting story to me too, because it kind of shows you how on a school-by-school basis, schools are trying to juggle the numbers in different ways. Some of them are saying, hey, we have so many awesome kids, let's just let them in because we don't know and we don't want to reject them. Other schools are saying, hey, we need to play it safe. We're not going to over-admit right now. Our yield might be off the charts. Let's not admit too many people because we're expecting to get more yield because the application numbers are so high. So there's different games that these individual admissions teams are playing, and we don't necessarily know what's going through all of their minds, but you can see that they're taking different strategies. And I think it will be interesting to see how those strategies play out in time. So now, what does this mean for you guys? The fact that all these admissions rate dropped like crazy, all these applications are flooding in like crazy. What does this mean for all of you guys who are still in high school and applying? And what does it mean for all of you guys that applied? Well, the first thing is if you applied and you're on a wait list, chances are you're not getting off the wait list. Because of the gap year situation and this idea of having potentially too many students on campus, and because admission rates were so darn low, I expect that we're going to see a much higher yield for the students that were admitted to particular colleges than we usually do. I expect we're going to have very inflated classes, larger class sizes than usual. Schools are going to be scrambling a little bit to fit everybody on campus. And some schools have already announced plans for how do we deal with this influx of students wanting more in-person classes, the fact that people deferred learning because they didn't want to pay for online school. In any case, you're probably not getting off the wait list if you're on a wait list. The other thing that this is really going to impact is you guys that are in high school right now. We don't know where schools are going to go with these test optional policies. I know some people have predicted that we're going to go test blind all over the place. We're going to completely annihilate the SAT and the ACT. I think that's the press trying to create clickbait. I don't think that's the truth. I think trying to have some sort of standardized measure whereby colleges can compare students is really valuable. And as you can see, when you've got like 3% admit rates, like there's probably a lot more students that are qualified, and it's hard to tell who's qualified and who's not qualified. And if you have some sort of standardized measure that requires you to have good reading comprehension skills, that requires you to learn certain math skills, and that's challenging, I don't think we're going to see that completely disappear. At the same time, this grand experiment that we have, colleges and universities are going to monitor, how does this freshman COVID class do? How do these kids we let in without test scores handle freshman year? Are they successful? What kind of students are we getting in the classroom? How does that change the profile of our university? And is it for good or is it for bad? They're going to be talking to professors. They're going to be trying to figure this out. We don't know the answer yet to that question. In any case, I do think it's a concern when we don't have tests available. And that's because I think it takes away an access point. To me, college admissions a lot of times is about knowledge, insider information, and access to a lot of things that privileged people have and people without privilege don't have as much of. A lot of times the kids who have the most wowish factors are kids who are already privileged because they're able to get their foot in the door in ways or spend time cultivating these kind of very impressive activities in ways that, you know, your average kid from your average town in America at an average high school isn't able to do. And that's why I love tests, because they're actually accessible. They're given to over 1 million students across the country at high schools everywhere, and everyone can take them, and everyone can use them to prove themselves. And I think throwing out these tests, because you guys don't like standardized tests, I mean, who likes a standardized test? I think it's potentially a move in the wrong direction when it comes to accessibility. I don't know if that's cheery or rosy, but I think lower admission rates aren't great for everybody out there. I don't think that makes our world a better place to have like 3.5% admission rates. We'll see how things go, but I think we're probably going to see tests come back into the mix more. I think we're probably going to see schools considering them more. I think right now the statistic is that 60% of colleges and universities have announced that they're going to be test optional or test blind through the next school year. But after that, I think we're probably going to see a return to the tests from a lot of schools, and we'll see what happens. So that's what I'm going to close with. I hope you guys had fun watching this video. So please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet, and we'll see you soon. Take care, you guys.